Hello again, friends, cousins, enjoyers of freedoms and justice and equity. Welcome back to Social Contract with I'm Nicolette, and I've got my co-host here with me, Jared.
What's going on? Good morning.
And we've got a packed show for you today. We we are happy to report finally that at 100 years of age, Henry Kissinger has finally died, and we'll be talking a little bit more about his legacy, I guess you would say, his lasting legacy and numerous war crimes a little later in the hour. And we've got some current events going on for you about what's happening in the world presently. Jared and I are both big history fans, so we love any opportunity to get to relitigate the past. And so we're going to take a step away from maybe looking for some helpful solutions with socialism to argue about the past a little bit. Maybe not argue, but discuss the past a little bit.
Nicolette, you talk
Um,
about us being fans of history. It's almost like in the current climate are the normal institutions that would be, or at least in theory, would be filling in like the little historical nuggets and oh yeah, it's become so impossible to receive accurate information about pretty much anything important at this point that you kind of have you're now forced to become a mild history fan because if you want to look like you know what you're talking about or be able to respond to some of the knee-jerk responses thrown out by people around you, you have to know these things now. I'm like an unwilling history fan where I wanted to stay dumb and uneducated and know nothing about history, and I'm mad that now I have to go and read about Henry Kissinger for a few hours and read about the history of the United Auto Workers and the AFL-CIO for a while, and I have to I want to achieve a world where I can have the comfortable laziness of not having to go and quickly restudy history.
I always feel like if you grew up on '80s movies like I did, like Johnny Five when he gets and Short Circuit when he gets the books or he gets a book and he's just going input input and he's going super fast. Like that's how my brain works. I have to know everything. I agree with you. I get so tired of having to like learn stuff I don't want to learn, but then I kind of feel better for it in the end because I feel like I can argue with people better, even though I never do. Like I never spend any time arguing with anybody, so all of this knowledge is just taking up space in my head, and then I don't know, maybe one day I'll have a stroke and it'll all be gone. Who knows? But
You
at
hear
this
somebody
point,
make a wild claim, and then you have to go like, "Wait, did that happen?" And then you go read, and that's how it starts.
yeah, exactly. And usually it's true. I mean, unless it's like about modern conflict stuff, it's usually like somebody will say, this person did this, this, and this, and you're like, I didn't know that, and then you go and you look it up, and you're like, oh shit, they did, they totally did. This is real. So I'm right there with you. Yeah, I like to learn what I like to learn, but I don't want to learn what I'm forced to learn. It's like being back in school. But then I think we're all the better for it, even if we're having to force ourselves to do things because like what does it hurt to know stuff really is what and be informed because I think that some of my personal feelings about some of the times that I've where you go over arguments you lost in your mind like when you're trying to sleep from like 10th grade or something like that. You're like, if I would have only known, if I would have googled that before I opened my mouth, like so I like to know things and be informed as much as possible, but it seems like everything you have to know now is always something that's come to light because it's awful and nobody knew about it before. And then most people don't even believe it. So it's like, okay, great. Now I've got to try to convince the entire world that, these things happened and this is what's going on. So yeah, today we're gonna get a little historical and it's not gonna be fun. We're gonna be fun, but the history is not gonna be fun. But right now, Jared's got some topical stories for us about what's going on in the world for those of you who like your news current. So take it away, Jared.
We are today talking about guess what? It's still Israel Palestine, but in a with a bit of a twist to it. We have a development we can talk about. I think I consider it a feel good story, at least as close to a feel good story as you are going to get from this topic. We are reading from The Guardian, well known like propagandists and stenographers of the state. That's part of what's getting a little weird is more and more news outlets. We don't do a ton of covering. We don't just like, we don't do a lot of covering directly what like NBC, CNN, and thus are, and the others are talking about, like other people on RBN do. But it has been interesting seeing like the narrative even from them is kind of shifting. I see a lot more talking about this claim turned out to be false, or oh, this in fact is a bunch of dying children and not a like a pile of dolls that I've been seeing. I've been seeing that the footage of injured and dying children in Palestine is all actually fake, and it's a series of very sophisticated dummies and puppets, which then, man, it's really, really sad. It's like triple sad when you go from, oh no, children are hurt, to, oh no, it's fine, those actually aren't real children, to, oh no, those are definitely absolutely real children, and they were real the whole time. Why would I ever let myself get tricked like this? The narrative is even changing there. So when you see stuff like, so I'm less surprised to see The Guardian covering this. United Auto Workers calls for ceasefire in Gaza. So the UAW, one of America's largest unions, the largest union to do so. UAW, representing 400,000 in the U.S. and over 580,000 retired workers, makes announcement as military operations resume. Let's read a little bit about, I don't know, Nicolette, do you know anything of the, and this, again, these are things that I read recently. It's not that I just have all this knowledge in my brain. It's forced to go read even more and more today, which might be a good thing. What do you know about UAW, like the AFL-CIO, like American unions' general war positions over the last, I don't know, 100 years? Is it a thing you hear about often?
I would say no. Now, again, I am a fan of unions, but I'm also not like, let me check my union news today type of thing. But let alone let me check my historical union news. Now, we do know that in the formation of unions in general, that it was always based on class. It was always based on bringing the underrepresented, the exploited people into the light to make the decisions about how things happen and what happens with them, and how that they are treated if they intend to do the work for the corporations. So it really comes as no great surprise to me that they would stand up for a ceasefire movement. Because it's basically like we stand up for the underrepresented of ourselves, so it would be normal for us to stand up for the underrepresented in other parts of the world, and I applaud them for that. Now, UAW, like all unions, maybe it doesn't always have the strongest leadership, because you see a lot of compromising that happens that probably wouldn't need to be compromised, but that is the kind of thing that happens when you have the elections and things like that. So that's not really part of this particular story, but throughout history, it's always been about representing the underrepresented. And I think that they have decided to go out of their way, being one of the biggest unions, to call for a ceasefire. I don't know that it's necessarily going to be that impactful, considering I would say the vast majority of people in general at this point, that aren't, sycophantic to one side or the other, are calling for ceasefire. And even, I guess you would say, even Israel supporters are tired of it too. I think the majority of people are not like kill. That is, I think
I saw polls today where somewhere over 60% of voters of all denominations are pro ceasefire at this point, right. Which again is kind of blowing my mind a little.
I was about to say 60% of everybody is almost unheard of. It's like
good.
You're probably not even going to get those numbers if you're like, do you like candy? Like
those are like Medicare for all numbers,
right? Yeah, that's the kind of thing that that's why I kind of am glad that Israel is going to so much trouble, spending billions and billions on propaganda that isn't working, and then they keep trying to re-strategize and keep trying to do something different, and it isn't working, because all the stuff that they had tried in the past that had worked tried and true, say with American propaganda, where you were led to believe that it was your personal duty to serve your country, and if you were drafted, it was an honor, type of a thing. going forward from the Vietnam era, which we'll talk about a little bit later, to now, like, people have become more informed, more aware that we're being lied to and we're being manipulated into doing things that we don't want to do. So now, at a time when we're more connected to each other than any other time in history, and I'm guessing just going on further than that, we as people see very little reason for conflict, and we can see, that you can't pull the wool over our eyes anymore, because we realize you are doing this for business purposes. You want their resources. Israel and America want, the natural gas and oil deposits in the land of Palestine. So we want to take control of that, just like everywhere, all the time. So it's an acquisition of resources, or conquest of resources, you might say. We know that they're making just billions and billions of dollars for everyone involved, and Ukraine in on this as well, with the weapons sells, selling weapons, dealing in weaponry, dealing in war. The money that comes through this is enriching a few people, but it's doing nothing but wreaking havoc on civilians and the feeling of having world peace. And Americans, and I guess Westerners maybe in general, just aren't buying it anymore. And I'm really pleased about that, obviously, because it's the kind of thing where it always felt like, even when people were more informed, it always still felt like an uphill battle. But this maybe is the first time it doesn't feel like you're just, banging a tambourine in the void, trying to say, this is bad, so listen, this is bad. Because it was so common for people, I would say even up until the digital age, let's say, it was really common for people to have a sense of pride in whatever America was doing, because they were the conquistadors. They were the ones that were doing the horrible things, but we're the ones that, it's our country doing it, so it must be right. And I will support my country. And you saw a rewave of that during the 9/11 era. But I think at this point, people like the UAW and other, just people as people are starting to see things more for what they are. Because you think like, okay, well, I follow this blogger in the Middle East. I follow them in China. I follow content. I like, what's going on in different parts of the world. And I don't see why I would want to agree to say, I think that you should die now because my country says so. So that's a big shift, a great big shift. And having the power of the UAW just by way of size, I think is a really excellent sign that I don't know that it's that you could really say that America is going to keep getting away with it anymore. But any way that we can make it harder on them and make it harder to control the narrative and do things in our name with our tax dollars, the better. But again, I think we talked about this a little bit before in some previous episodes, where they would have done things in the dark previously in history. They do it right out in the open now. So we know what they're doing, and they don't care. They just get in and get out as fast as the Democrats right now, they don't care if they win re-election. They don't care if they win election at all, because they can just go and blame the Republicans or Trump or whoever takes over, which is what it will be. And then they can just fundraise off of that. So, and then in fundraising, you ultimately they get to decide where the money goes, just, to themselves, how they want to distribute it. So there's a lot of money moving, and it's really all about money moving, and they just don't even bother to hide it anymore. So even with the support of a big union this way, good thing. It's a good thing socially. It unites people in a social type of a way, which is good. And to say that we as the union all agree, as one of the largest unions, that's great news as well. And I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that it's the kind of thing that really will turn the tides to say, we're watching you and we know what's going on. And this is exactly what I've been talking about a lot, that I would like to see happen moving beyond labor, is people banding together with a kind of union protection to say, well, we're going to decide now, if you don't call a permanent ceasefire, not some of these fake, couple day ceasefire things that we just went through. If you don't call a permanent ceasefire, we're going to stop paying our credit bills, or, we're going to do something that, you're not going to like. So it gives people the power to push back against the government that they don't agree with, because they are supposed to be representing us and they are not, and maybe never really have had the interest of the people in mind, at least not in the modern era, that I can think of. It's once you could blame it on Reagan, you definitely should, but it does go back before that. After the Kennedy assassination, where the CIA was like, "Hey, we'll blow a president's brains out right in the middle of a parade. Don't mess with us. We're going to do what we want." All bets were pretty much off at that point.
I want to discuss a possible, I don't know, I guess an alternate history, because you're talking about how it is good that like the UAW is like, it's kind of neat to see labor getting involved in politics, but that's kind of has been in years past, that was kind of the expected tradition. There's been a split in American labor for a while, and you'll see this kind of split in pretty much every country's like labor movement. So for the last century, unions have been a place where people of the working class, people who otherwise would not have other representation, can find and build power within the labor movement. The reason that it has been that way for the last, or at least has had that perception for the last about 100-ish years, we had the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, which was closer to like craftsman trade union-y type stuff, which sort of, and this is where you can get into debate, which may or may not have spun out of, okay, so previously you have slavery, so labor kind of has its own pre-done division, right, where you have the free labor, and then you have the labor that poor white people are trying to sell to each other. Obviously, the free labor really messes up your labor market, so now we're post that. All right, we're already used to being, like, segregated in this way. The AFL kind of forms around, it is a white union, it is a segregated union, and that was the pattern. To get into the crafts guilds, to get into the painters, whatever, blah, blah, you had to be white and usually a guy. And then who came along and integrated the unions in America? Communists. The communists came along, and eventually you get the CIO, which was meant to compete with the AFL, like the American Federation of Labor, or by and for white guys who already have some money, probably already own a shop, blah, blah. Then you have the CIO. We are the rabble, all the randos who have nothing to sell about our labor, like the most proletarian people in the nation. And they start working more and more together. World War II hits. Suddenly, this whole segregation thing seems silly because, like, the nation is literally in threat of getting overthrown by, World War II things are happening. You get what you call the United Front, where the commies are like, we're all going to chill about trying to take down the American Empire until we get this war over with. Right. So you have the unions agreeing to stop doing strikes during World War II, because like, well, you guys are going to mess up our iron production, and we need our coal. Like, you're going to lose us the war if we can't produce things. That was the argument that was made, and they're like, fine. The second this war is over, though, we're going back to fighting. And coincidentally, the second that war was over, you get the Taft-Striegel Act. I can't remember the name of these things. I hate that I have to learn history now. The communists are now illegal act in your labor union, and then suddenly the unions become less anti-war just in time for like Korea and Vietnam, etc. And the union priorities tilt from fighting for just general labor, because yes, United Auto Workers would fight for auto workers, and that would be the actions they would take. But if it's in the socialist style leadership, the workers fighting for other worker style leadership, it always had an eye for like, yes, but also in general, we're making grander, broader steps for the entire labor movement, so we can have enough power that we can act on issues that aren't specifically, I need to turn a wrench this many times this day at this factory, which is hyper specific, and that style of like labor organizing will get you wages at your one particular job, maybe. Or you have the radical union movement, which was going on big time in the 70s, right along with the Black Panther Party, etc. That was like it's weird that we look back at the 70s as like this horrible, scary time in America. It doesn't get the same nostalgia glasses as like the 80s, and that is ironically like when labor was at its height. It was at its strongest. You had unions, the strikes going on everywhere, and then the movies portray that as like, and it was hell on earth. It was it was America. Right, yeah. Look at all the poverty, and it's like, yes, and they're fighting against the poverty. Say what you're
Right.
gonna
Yeah.
say,
The
Nicolette.
people causing the poverty were like, look at all the poverty. So like trying to blame, it's like blaming people for not recycling for, the reason that the world is trashed. So, all right.
But
Thanks.
that same split exists today, where you have pretty much integrated. You have bosses unions, like the union that exists, so the boss can be like, "Oh, look, see, we did this negotiation with our union. Look at how good and equitable we are." Where the leadership of said unions are like going to the same parties as they're basically lobbyists that seem to be like, "All right, cool down all of your the actual employees to be less mad about this decision we're going to make." And then you have like the radical union movement, which is the time to strike is absolutely in the center of World War II, because that is when we have the largest leverage we're ever gonna get. And this is when we can make some actual core changes to like the actual revolutionary like murmurings going on, because that's when the government was at its weakest. And guess what happened right after World War II, and they kicked out all the communists? The whole thing slowed down. They go back on all their promises. Nobody got the raises they were supposed to get. They didn't get their 40-hour work week. They didn't get. They eventually, you get there eventually. But then once you've added in all these overtimes, etc., what is a 40-hour work week for the people who fought for it? All right, let me read a little bit from this article talking about today. I say all of that because if we hadn't been if the labor movement in all capital letters hadn't been kind of derailed in the World War II, post World War II, making that kind of organizing illegal. If that, because it's not just that I'll just stop calling myself a socialist and I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. No. It's the strategies they're employing. They'll just then call you that and you're out. Like it's not like, it's kind of like, how come in World War II they did not simply say I am not Jewish anymore? It's because it wasn't really about that. It was like your
It's
family
not about the
lineage.
label. It's about the activities.
Yeah, it's
They
about
want
like
to try to
your
stop
fam.
organizing.
The United Auto Workers, one of the U.S.'s largest labor unions, has come out in support of a ceasefire in Israel and Palestine, as a temporary ceasefire ended on Friday with Israel resuming military operations in Gaza. Many would say that the ceasefire never really happened because they just started bombing the West Bank and Lebanon and everywhere else during. The UAW is now the largest union to have called for a ceasefire. It represents 400,000 workers in the U.S., more than 500,000 retired workers. I am proud today to announce the UAW International has joined the call for a ceasefire in Israel and Palestine, says Brandon Menchia, UAW director, said at a press conference on Friday outside of the White House, where protesters have been on hunger strike. Oh, I didn't hear about that. From opposing fascism in World War II, to what? To what happened after that? From opposing fascism in World War II to mobilizing against apartheid South Africa and the Contra War, the UAW has consistently stood for justice across the globe. A labor movement that fights for social and economic justice for all workers must always stand against war and for peace. These guys almost always say like the best words. Like I would absolutely agree with this guy. Our International Executive Board will also be forming a divestment and just transition working group to study the history of Israel and Palestine, our union's economic ties to the conflict, and explore how we can have a just transition for U.S. workers from war to peace. Have you ever heard what is it? Is it a BDS? Like Nicolette, when people talk in Israel, they talk about BDS. Do you remember what all the BDS letters? I thought it was a K-pop band.
Right, yeah, no, I always seem to, like, this is so stupid, but I always mix it up with, like, the BTK killer. I always mix the letters up, like, and I always have to be like, no, separate it in your brain, So BDS is boycott, divest, and sanction. And that's the kind of thing where I actually, I'm fully behind it, because I think that a lot of,
it's the literal least that can be done.
Right, exactly. It's like the bare minimum, except that it's the kind of thing where, like, this is a little bit diversioning, but like the way that when the railroad strike was going on and Biden got involved and said you could not do that because technically the railroad or the railways are owned by the government, and that's why it's like, how did this happen? So it's sort of the same sort of thing. The government is not going to be willing to take part in any of these things. So it really does come down to individual industries. But then if these individual industries who aren't as big as the UAW and don't have that much literal membership that can, fight against those kind of things, they're going to basically cower to what the government says to do, because whether they have, the government can stop them from doing things or not, because our government can always make life impossible and make earning impossible and drive them out of business. So yes, in one way, the BDS movement is the bare minimum of things that can be done. But in a lot of cases, especially tiny businesses or just not necessarily just independent businesses, but, the small business set, but just smaller industries really don't have that kind of leverage that the UAW has. So it will take larger organizations that can speak for the smaller organizations. Because
let me put a thing on screen.
Yeah,
we're talking about BDS right now. This is a map that I'm pulling up. This is Wikipedia, the best source. Add to state. There it is. Wikipedia, the best source in the world. These are the states that have laws against attempting boycott, divest, and sanction campaigns against Israel. These are the states where there are laws either preventing or fully outlawing you from trying to do that. Here, the purple ones. If it's purple, you have legislation that has already been passed limiting your availability to either advocate for those actions or like try to do them yourself. Like you'll get labeled as hate speech. Like it's the same as if you like are advertising with a bunch of Klan flags on the front of your business. Like that's how the law starts seeing you, depending on what state you're in.
Equating you with terrorism, effectively.
Yeah. They think you're a terrorist, which is very weird and funny because what is America's strategy against how many different countries? Like a huge chunk of the world right now. We are B, D, and S-ing like Afghanistan, Iran, China in some ways, Russia in a lot of ways. Like we do that that's the U.S.'s first tool that they say is like a very good tool.
Marginalizing and these other places that won't do what we say.
We try to ruin their economies, which is a very empire-y thing to do. But they're like, well, it's better than bombs, right? And then you're like, well, it still resulted in this many deaths because people starved. But sure, go ahead. Think it's better. So, like, these are the states who don't want you to try and boycott, divest, sanction a literal apartheid regime. If this was South Africa back in the day, it'd be the same situation. And like, the opinion is not as split on that one, weirdly, once you have some historical context.
Right. I wouldn't say it's necessarily like an unusual situation because like you say, that's pretty much our first line of defense, but it's like by another name. It's not terrorism if we call it something nice,
It's real weird that in the land of the free, home of the brave, First Amendment, all that shit, if you own like a donut shop and you're like, I will be divesting my donuts from Israel, like the governor, who's probably like, this is very much a bipartisan thing, by the way. This is one of those like 99% vote yes, 1% votes present in your like houses of Congress, you're in your state senates, etc. I think Gavin Newsom put in one of these. Like you can be the donut shop owner who's like, I think Israel should kill fewer babies, and the state will just consider you a domestic terrorist.
Right. Yeah, and then and effectively drive you out of business. Whether not in a way that can really be seen where you could bring a lawsuit against them, assuming you had the resources to do so, which they know you don't. And as the small business donut shop owner, but they just will make things so hard on you, constant audits and investigations of you, harassment of you, like people following you, coming and raiding your business maybe for not necessarily for a specific reason, just under that blanket of we suspect you. So we're going to have all your stuff torn up and taken out. And then maybe you'll get your stuff back. Good luck doing business again after that. They can also manipulate the terms of your rental agreements, all kinds of things like this.
If they want to, If they really want to bring the hammer down on you, they can.
It's not like this is new. They're pros. They know how to manipulate their own people. And that's why propaganda was always so effective up until recently. And now they're having to re-strategize because they could just make people think that if they didn't do what the government said, that they were a dissident of some kind, or that they were, not grateful to be in the land of milk and honey, and then get other people, your neighbors, just like, you're supposed to out communists during the McCarthy era. It's your duty to tell people about to tell your local officials that there are some communist sympathizers going on, that there might be Black people organizing, and if you've seen it, or there might be a gay in your neighborhood.
FBI
They
has
thought
already
it was
come.
your obligation. They wanted you to believe that you were helping the government, that you were by extension a member of the government by tattling on your neighbors or people in your community or your children's teachers or whatever. And it led to all kinds of these problems. And then we like to think, well, okay, after the McCarthy era ended, that stuff we were like, that's passe now. We're not going to do that anymore, and all these movements kind of moved forward, like with, civil rights and gay rights and things like this. But they didn't. They just changed it to make sure that they put everything, especially after 9/11, put everything under the auspice of terrorism, and then just throw anything into the Patriot Act that will allow for domestic surveillance to go on. And that's that. And that's how it works. And we all basically run that risk. I don't think that anything that you or I particularly say is that incendiary. We're not calling necessarily for any acts of any kind of violence or action against anything, but
we're calling for the UN rules to be followed.
Well, yeah, I think my hope in all of this is just to inform people more, and just to say, like, CNN is out there, MSNBC is out there, you don't trust them, but where else are you going to turn? So let's look at some alternative thoughts here and try to work our minds together and see, like, okay, we're agreeing that we don't agree with what we're being told. So what's the next step? And I don't really know what the next step is. I just want to, I think right now we're agreeing we don't agree with the mainstream, and then let's figure it out together type of a situation.
I'm seeing my least favorite comment in the chat, which is something wrong with the feed? Please tell us, guys. Is our audio okay? Is our video okay? If there's a specific issue going on, tell us, because I would hate to just yap into my microphone for 20 minutes of actual... that was silence the whole time. So yeah, thank you very much. Please be our sound and video checkers as we're going through this.
Also, if you miss something live, it might just be because it's live, so you may be able to check back and after recorded and see, there just might be a delay at certain times. We all work with the same technology, which is shit, and it shouldn't be. I mean, look at the way the internet runs in other countries, like, South Korea, like, where you could download a movie, in 30 seconds, right? Like high definition. And then, okay, I see now this person says they think it was them.
Sorry, yeah, it's fine. That's the way this all ends up ending. That's how the U.S. empire. I mean, there is a possibility that we just start nuking everybody, but I don't know. I'm thinking that's less and less likely. It's that countries that are already pretty consistently be more responsible for the technological developments that like allow our society to truly advance. Those countries are now like China and the people working with China.
Right. Well, it keeps us under control. It keeps us from the entire MO of, I would say, most governments, but definitely the American or Western governments, is keep people from organizing, period. Like, no organizing, no thinking together, no getting together, don't do anything, or we'll call it terrorism. So the best way to do that is to take technology that is very much out there and available.
Or they get us to call each other sexists and... I have a very weird, I have an odd place in, like, the queer community, which I don't even talk about that much, because I'm seeing queerness being used as the excuse and reason for the machinations of empire just proceeding as usual. Like, when they go over and are attacking Israel... when Israel is attacking Palestine, I'm told that I am supposed to be happy about that because... Don't you know how you would be treated in Palestine if you lived in Palestine? And it's just like the most insidious stuff, because Israel, I could not go get married. If I was married over here in the U.S. as a gay man to another man and then went over to Israel, my marriage just doesn't count in Israel because it's not a sanctioned Jewish marriage. And it's not even that they care about the Torah and being like perfectly Jewish, because they're breaking rules in the Torah every day when they're bombing this concentration camp that they're keeping. So like the logic falls apart immediately, and I hate that I am being, in a very roundabout way, weaponized and used to keep people from organizing, because they'll be like, oh, that person, you can't organize with them. They are homophobic for this very you could be called homophobic because you support Palestine. They'll be like, oh, well, you see, Palestinians may or may not. Some Palestinians are homophobic, therefore they must all die.
Right. Yeah, therefore they are the enemy of all people at all times. Well, I wonder if that's
women too right now.
I wonder if that's not a propagandist tactic. You don't always know where the propaganda comes from. The government uses influencers and people maybe that they have determined maybe don't have that many followers, but if they can get them to say certain incendiary buzzwords, that they will attract attention to themselves and then start getting those kind of messages out there. So I wonder if some of those messages to say that like you're being anti-queer or you're going against the gay rights, is it trickle down propaganda to try to get people to say like, oh, am I doing that? I don't want to do that. I don't want to go against gay rights. Well, maybe I'm wrong. Anything that will get you to question yourself. You don't have to fully on say like, oh, well, in that case, I think a ceasefire would be bad. Like it's just wheedle.
They got to put doubt in there somewhere. Like, this is really obvious, right? No.
But here's the thing. If you're on any point of view, right? There's no question that anybody watching this today and ourselves, we come from a socialistic point of view. But if you're not always questioning your point of view, then you become a stand, just like any of the people that we're trying to always railing against. You become a liberal stand. You become a conservative stand. You are a person who refuses to adapt and to learn and to listen. You have to understand what the other people are upset about or agree with you about, even if the ideology is different, or you become too polarized in your own self and think that you're perfect and you're right, and you're not. We're not all right. We just are trying to do the best that we can, and this is our area of where we believe that we should be.
Let me round out the end of this UAW story, because the general message here is we like what the UAW is doing. We sure wish that it was bigger, so the thing it was doing mattered more. And it is absolutely a concerted effort on the part of the empire to. That's another reason that keeping union power low is good, because who can whip up a protest real fast than a union? They already have the people and the mailing lists.
Ready to go. That's what I think we can learn from them as people in the world. That kind of organization, and that's why I hope to see someday it's expand in a greater way to represent more people just outside of labor, because there's just so many people. If you look at the scale of things, people represented by a labor union against the whole population of like the United States is relatively small. So if we all had more representation to decide and have more influence on where the direction of things we wanted things to go in, I think that we would have a much greater sense of security and peace and knowledge of the world. Just knowing, okay, we're working together. We know what we want. We have, protections, like unions do it in some ways to keep us from being marginal.
That's one of the biggest part of it, because like you're just talking about, if you in any way fight against the system, you might even be sexist, racist, homophobic. You're gonna be called it regardless. You could you could be Mr. Rogers out there, and if you are going against empire, you're gonna be accused of freaking everything. And a union can be there like, hey man, I knew they were gonna do that shit. Anyway, we're gonna help you pay your bills. Like,
right?
It makes all this risk go down if you are doing it collectively, rather than I will singularly take a stand and then singularly be out the door on my ass.
Right, and that's the thing too. If it's a collective, which is obviously what the governments fear, if it's a collective, then you can't be that single person that's singled out and I don't want to say martyrized necessarily, but that kind of is what happens. Like they take one person and they throw the book at them, and for things that lots of other people are doing, and then if you had a group of people abiding by those same kind of tenets, you would have much greater, in numbers, like working in numbers, the safety in numbers situation. So I hope that we can spread that word and that gospel, and I hope that people get that idea. For me, it's like I've never really heard anybody talk about it before, other than like when I got really upset and started talking about it in my personal streams about how AI is going to take over everybody's job, and then we're going to find this new wave of joblessness. Not to diverge too far off the path here. but we need to think, we need to think about things before bad stuff happens, and try to take care of each other, because it's just not on our nature. We're driven apart deliberately. We're kept from knowing what's going on deliberately, and we're forced to live off of very low incomes, work hundreds of jobs just to try to make it, because that keeps us in control and in line. And not just when you have labor unions negotiating wages, negotiating working conditions, they don't necessarily have to deal with those same situations as people with no protections. It may be a little bit apples to oranges. You don't want to say like guy with a labor union doesn't struggle as much as, or other way around. But the point is there is more safety in numbers. We should be learn how to rely on each other again. We're going to have to individually teach ourselves civics again, because we can't rely on anybody else to do it. So hopefully, they stopped teaching that stuff in schools on purpose, like in, 70s, 80s. They're like, oh yeah, budget cuts. I'm sure you take something that's one of the most important things that people need to know and say it's a budget cut, but say la vie.
The union movement grew because the people doing the things won. They got something, and then that increases your support because you're demonstrating your own value.
Yes.
And to do that, you have to look at, okay, what leads to victory?
And the fact that they have their own internal superstructure. They elect their own leaders, for better or worse, which always can, lead to corruption or weak leadership. But that's why they keep doing it, right? They're not beholden to outside representation like the rest of us are. Like, we have to say like, oh, well, I got to go vote in this election, so I have representation. And then they don't do shit for you. So they don't care about you at all. They're wanting to be a celebrity, and they're wanting to line their pockets. But, when it comes to a group who has worked together to elect someone to do a certain amount of jobs related to their job, then it's much more of an effective system. And I just wish we all had that. So, okay, I think we are about ready to switch to a different history lesson here. Now, I actually, when I was doing some research on, because as we promised at the top of the hour, we were going to talk about Henry Kissinger finally dying. And there was a couple of days of revelry online for that, which is funny because I kind of expected it to last longer. And, everybody who had been so excited for it to happen and kind of just, is it today? Is it today? Somebody else would die, and they'd be like, damn it, not Kissinger though. Right. But I guess that it turns out that when someone who was a shadow dictator who was treated like, pseudo royalty and lived in the lap of luxury his entire life finally shuffles off the mortal coil at age 100, it's really not that satisfactory after it happens. So people, I think, were a little bit more disappointed than they thought that they were going to be. I think that they thought that they were going to be happier about it, but it did at least bring forward a lot of conversation about things that had been found out and are still being found out, because I personally had to look into it just to try to get my head around what the level of damage, because the estimates of his death toll are anywhere from 3 million to 11 million, which, short side, steep side. And then I'm like, okay, that's pretty insane for one person. So, I wanted to be a little more informed about it. So, but what I found out was there's just so much information coming out still. And primarily because he worked mostly for the Nixon administration, and Nixon was such an idiot, he recorded everything. So these recordings are, they're out there. And Nixon was also like this perfect storm type of a mark for Kissinger to just kind of steamroll and take over, because he was just so goddamn stupid. Then he wanted to be, he wanted that Kennedy celebrity status. He wanted to be a dictator. He wanted to do all these things, but he just didn't know how to do it. And he was just deeply, deeply stupid. And then next came in Ford, and who was also just deeply stupid and didn't know what he was doing. Like as if Kamala Harris took over the presidency, basically. And so someone who is cunning and understands how to do things like Kissinger did was really able to get in there and make things happen in a very dictator-like way that is actually very shocking, is what I think when you start going down the list. So I had to make a summary. So I'm going to read my summary. I can't share my screen. It's on my computer. But I'm going to share my summary with you real quick, and this might take a minute to get through. But basically, this is just the high point that I'm going to cover here. First of all, he was only literally employed by the government for 8 years as Secretary of State. So, between 68 and 76. And you think, like, how could you kill 11 million people in 8 years? But here we go. Buckle up, right? So ultimately, it started, his activity started in 1968, where he personally sabotaged peace talks between the U.S. and the Viet Cong while consulting the Johnson administration and this happened during the Paris peace talks of 1968. So that was his first foray into sabotage. So as you said earlier, yeah, he's the guy that did Vietnam, and this is how he did it. Because there already was conflict going on, but he made sure that he sabotaged the conflict, and he did that by literally doing espionage, because he passed on confidential intel to the South Vietnamese government, which escalated the conflict. So it's been colloquially said, this isn't like super for sure, but just to give you an idea of how Nixon was as a person, it's pretty widely reported that he watched, had a screening of the movie Patton at his, meaning General Patton, like the movie George C. Scott, at the White House, and then the next day made a decision to invade Cambodia. Like he was just desperate to be that guy, right? So 1969, Cambodia gets invaded by us. And we mounted initially a secret bombing campaign for 540,000 bombs to be dropped for what was called Operation Menu. And Kissinger and Nixon conspired to conceal this from Congress. So they didn't know about it. They just arranged for this to happen shadow government style. And the intent was to suppress the Khmer Rouge, which was a group that was supporting the communist North Vietnam. And then this ultimately led to 8 more years of civil war between Cambodia, the Cambodian government, and the Khmer Rouge. And that death toll was estimated at 275 to 310,000. And they took a scorched earth approach and said that 1/5 of the country was completely destroyed at that point from the bombing campaign. And Kissinger later tried to claim that it was the bombings were done on unpopulated land, which makes zero sense, because why would you just bomb empty land? So next, we moved 1970 to Bangladesh. The country was already divided at that point, geographically was divided into East and West Pakistan, as it was called at the time. And they then initially, Nixon and Kissinger backed the West genocide campaign. But then when they illegally, to fan the flames of the conflict, he and Nixon illegally, that's Kissinger and Nixon, illegally transferred military weaponry to East Pakistan government to perpetuate the war. Now, what does that sound like? Where Biden has just recently lifted all the sanctions about trading military hardware or giving military hardware to Israel. Okay. And then it was illegal then at that time. Now, apparently, good to say, I'm doing it. It's done. So ultimately, the death estimate for that conflict was estimated between 300,000 and 500,000, but the Bangladeshi government estimates it could have been as much as 5 million. So next, 1973, in Chile, there is a socialist leader named Salvador Allende, and he implemented all these really great reforms, nationalizing their copper mining system, free healthcare and education, working on bringing people out of poverty, and reestablishing diplomacy with the Soviet Union and Fidel Castro of Cuba. So we don't like that. Nixon and Kissinger then spent millions of dollars through secret undermining operations to undermine the government and protect U.S. business interests. And within 3 years of doing that, the country faced record inflation, widespread strikes, partially funded by the CIA, and assisted in a coup led by General Augusto Pinochet. Allende was killed in the presidential palace on 9/11/1973. And the estimated death toll of that conflict was 40,000 people. In that country, then, Chile was under that military rule of a dictatorship until the 90s. And then when asked about it, Kissinger denied all knowledge or involvement. And then so after that happened, we're winding up to the end of Vietnam. So we decide, or the committee decides, let's give Kissinger the 1973 Nobel Peace Prize for negotiating the end of the war that he helped start. So that's a pretty good case of stop hitting yourself. And so he manages to become a pseudo celebrity at this point and be loved by the West. And then we go a couple of years later, hit into the conflict in Indonesia, where now he's working with Ford after Nixon absconded. And he says, he and Ford meet with a dictator. Suharto, I think is how you say it. And they didn't directly do it. This was one of their indirect things, but they greenlit that dictator invading what was called East Timor at the time, creating a civil war. And the estimated death toll of that was 200,000. And that conflict lasted until 2002. And he also refused to admit any involvement. So fast forward to 1976, where they provided support to a military coup by General Jorge Rafael Videla to overthrow President Isabel Perón. And this time roped Congress into it, got them to give them $50 million to fund this the dictatorship that'll after the coup. And then Kissinger personally became friends with Videla. So this also led to what was called the Dirty War. And that lasted between 1976 and 1983, where the military rulers did what the country calls disappearing people. And that was literally just snatching people and killing them, students primarily. And I actually just happened to see a documentary on this about the forensic team of students that came together to try to identify these bodies. And it's still happening because they would just take them off into the woods and kill them. And that death toll was estimated at 10 to 30 million citizens, not million, rather 10,000 to 30,000 citizens. And it was later discovered that these people who were identified as political prisoners, the reason why a lot of them can't even be found is because they were dumped from helicopters into the Atlantic Ocean alive. So, and then ultimately Videla was convicted of torture, kidnapping, and murder, and he died in prison in 2013. So I do have something here.
If you get into really weird, I don't want to say weird leftist internet because the leftist part really has nothing to do with it. You've seen memes of people getting chucked out of helicopters. That is what they are referring to.
Right. Yes. And that's a way that it was to it's sort of like a common thing to do. Now this comes from, again, it's a tweet. It's just by a person, but I kind of looked into this and their numbers seem correct. This is from a person on Twitter called Trans Judo Bolshevik, and they are kind of summarizing the numbers on the victims of Kissinger, because I just hit the high points in what I just told you. So what we're looking at here, as they summarize it, is 3 million Vietnamese. Let me see, make sure that's sharing the way I want it to. Can you see that? Add the stage.
I got nothing. There it is.
Okay. 3 million Vietnam. This is the estimated death tolls, according to governments and people. So 3 million Vietnamese, 2.5 million Cambodians, 200,000 Laotians, 3 million Bangladeshi, 10,000 plus Indians, 10,000 plus Pakistanis, 15,000 plus Egyptians, 3,500 Syrians, 6,500. What's that?
Cypriots, people from Cyprus.
Cyprus. Okay, you're right. Okay, thank you. 40,000 plus Chileans, 30,000 plus Argentinians, and this actually goes on. Let me get you the next.
Continued in second tweet.
Continued in second tweet. Yeah, here we go. Come on now. Do what I want you to do. Share screen. I'm still kind of getting used to the technical aspect of this. Okay. So here we go. Almost. Okay. 10,000 Zimbabweans, 80,000 plus, or I'm sorry, that's a 60,000 plus Mozambicans, 900,000 Angolians, 11,000 Guinea-Bissau's, 300,000 East Timorians, 1 million Indonesians, 20,000 plus Western Saharans, and 1.1 million Iraqis. Okay. So I did look into that, because like I said, I had to summarize. There was so much to say about these crimes that it's really almost unbelievable. And for context, Hitler and the Nazi Party are only credited, or I shouldn't say only, but are credited with killing about 11 million people. And that includes Jewish people, but also political dissenters, people accused of being gay, basically non-whites. So you would have the Roma cultures, which are more commonly known as gypsies. Those people, and there's several different sects of those types of people. So basically anybody who they deemed inferior. And again, these are all estimates because...
Never forget 20 million Russians as well.
Yes, absolutely. And so this was an entire regime doing this. Not, obviously Hitler is at the top of the list here, but at the top of the pyramid, but he's in control of an entire regime. When you look at the numbers associated with just the 8 years that Kissinger was not president, not vice president, but Secretary of State, and learned in some way to manipulate, these really stupid presidents who wanted to be, these warmongers anyways, and exploit them in this, and you can say almost Svengali type of a way, except that they're so stupid that almost implies that he had to work at it. But really, all he had to do was basically wave in front of them wealth and power and wealth and power. And these numbers, they don't include people who were maimed and survived, people who later died because of the environmental terrorism,
Agent Orange and shit.
Yeah, people who were tortured, who were sexually violated and things like this. And so there were so many that were absolutely destroyed, lives and way of lives and countries, and this persists to this day. And I found that I don't want to say fascinating, but it really is fascinating, because it's hard to imagine somebody who wasn't even a president, who was only supposed to be a consultant, did all of this. But also, he spent the rest of these almost 100 years being a consultant to every other president up until this one.
He's shaking Obama's hand,
yeah, and Biden's out there like, I don't know him. But it's like, yes, you do. You had him on speed dial, just like everybody else did, So it's fascinating in the worst way, is what I've come to learn from my own personal history. And I didn't have a specific thing to show, to share, because this stuff is very verifiable, and it's a lot of it is just now coming to light as these stupid Nixon tapes keep getting found. I don't know what was going through that guy's head. He's trying to do some of the worst things in history, and he's like, let me do secret recordings of it, because that will stay secret.
It's a very different mindset, because it's the mindset of people who had no idea the internet would ever exist. It just seems so mind-boggling. It's like, never record evidence of anything.
Right, yeah. It seems like that would be like the number one thing. Like, you would just think, don't do that. Just in general, don't do that. But, that's the kind of people they were dealing with. So it seems it was like a perfect storm for Kissinger to basically act as a shadow dictator, by making these guys inflating their egos and making them think that they were going to be considered like the dominant American world heroes who were going to take control of the world and the earth and everything. All the resources are ours just because we want it. And I think maybe the ultimate irony is Kissinger was Jewish, and in his early years lived in Nazi Germany, and somehow I don't know, just took the ideology of the Nazis and put that to work for him. So it's I think a very bizarre story, a very tragic story, and something that it's still affecting a lot of these countries to this day. They, their economies were not able to recover. They're still dealing with a lot of obviously missing relatives and things like that, but they're dealing with the fallout, nuclear fallout, or not nuclear necessarily, but like the toxic fallout from dropping all these bombs and just destroying their lives. So think about all the people who have died of cancers and things like that just by the exposure to all the toxic chemicals. And we've learned through studies of Holocaust, the children and the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, that's where we learned about generational trauma, that trauma and fear and issues can actually be passed down through DNA. And so you have to think about, like, even though he's now dead, effectively what he did to these places in the world may never actually fully recover vis-a-vis generational trauma. There are always going to be these economic problems. There are always going to be these health problems. There are always going to be these issues. So it's like it's astounding to think about. Those numbers are practically incalculable, as I see it.
So the thing I pulled up, weird Kissinger, it's not even weird Kissinger facts. It's just, I guess, to try to illustrate how all of these things, especially what will be the historical figures of tomorrow, like in 50 years when we're talking about Kissinger and their impact on the world. The one country that Kissinger seemed to not want to burn to the ground was China for some reason. For some reason, like, Kissinger is responsible for a secret meetings that happened between at-time Chinese President Deng Xiaoping and first Kissinger and then eventually Nixon, which at the time in the 70s was a huge deal because no American president had ever spoken. Like, it was the whole, like,
right, yeah.
We do not talk to communist China at all. And it's because they wanted to get one up on the USSR. Like, it's not because, Kissinger was a nice guy and his heart grew 5 sizes that day or whatever. Like, Nixon, surprise. Good. It's for other geopolitical moves, mainly being that the USSR at the time was seen as the much bigger threat to the overall capitalist system than tiny little who gives a shit, everyone is dying and poor there China at the time.
Right. It's worth mentioning that it was not the China of today. Yeah, it was extraordinarily rural. It was underdeveloped. And that's why in the 70s and 80s, going back to what we were talking about at the top of the hour, to break up the unions, the bosses of these, manufacturing corporations sent their work to China as they were starting to because they could exploit the labor, just like a lot of places still do in other countries right now. They could exploit the labor, and then that's why the labor union died out, because they figured out a way to go and have things made overseas, a la slave labor. But China was smart, and they invested in themselves. They invested in they weren't worried about being the biggest military power in the world. They invested in their infrastructure. They invested in business. They invested in education. They invested in wellness, and they have now become an absolute superpower. And that's why we're trying to pick war with them, because one of the last exploitable places in their territory is Taiwan, where we have sworn allegiance to and keep saying it's a sovereign country, and it is not. It belongs to China. It absolutely belongs to China.
We got the 51st state Israel, the 52nd state's Taiwan, and the 53rd state is part of Ukraine, I think. But
Ukraine now, exactly.
It's crumbling away every second now. You end up with, that's how you get the China that we all kind of grew up thinking about, where it's like, it's where everyone works in a factory and is paid a nickel a day. And like, it kind of did start that way, but over time, now your Chinese factory workers are paid their wages are getting comparable to U.S. ones. And if you look at like disposable income on average, just look at China, look at India, and realize they had relatively similar. You can never get a perfect like experimental control group, but if you look at India's growth and mostly the growth of their poorest classes of people. India is a major tech player, is a major military player, major humongous economy, the world's largest democracy, billions of people in India. And look at your average Indian person's like life expect, and I mean average like working class, normal Indian people, not the ones who are in the movies and people who live in slums. And notice that, wow, China barely even has slums anymore. They've essentially eliminated extreme poverty. Like very, very few Chinese people like live in a freaking mud hole for $1 a year anymore. Where India, just sprawling slums. They make movies about it every year. It's just one of the most commonly known things about the country is, wow, they managed to have their massive, massive economic growth while completely abandoning their lower class. Where China, massive, massive economic growth, and it is very, very hard to deny the benefits for their lower classes.
Yeah, I think that is a really fascinating thing that they have done. And they have their problems, just like everybody does. But for us to point at them and be like, human rights violators, and we don't like the way you do things. And, it's like, okay, pot calling kettle black. Like, you can't, the way that Have you seen our infrastructure? Drive under any bridge in this country and wonder if you're going to make it through onto the other side, because you can see that it is literally crumbling. Like we have no excuse here. That's exactly if you put China who worked for the greater good and now are living with the fruits of that after several generations, and then America, who has no excuse for not doing the same thing, but hoarded all the wealth and put everybody in this position of being marginalized and controlled, and stupid and uneducated and dying from poison food and poison water, and then just continually eking away at it, what little there is of that, and openly lying to us. I mean, it's a tale of two cities, big time, because here's, again, China's got its own issues, but here's a way to do it right. Invest in your people, invest in your poorest people, because they, okay, let me get a little Negan here. People are a resource. That's the thing about it. People are a resource, and they saw that, whether it was for industrial reasons or not, that they now are a superpower, that now we're getting all, our machismo on, trying to say, well, you can't tell us what to do. We're America. We tell everybody what to do. So that's where we have ended up in this geopolitical struggle. And yes, it was a huge deal for Nixon to visit China, because at that time in the 70s,
it's related to this
closed door. It was absolutely both ways, really. It was a closed door situation. So it was very, very mysterious. Nobody in the West knew much about China. So we just had these notions that people were fed, that that they live in extreme poverty in mud huts, and they don't, they're just live to die, basically. And then we've learned over time that no, they know how to work society like really well. So
there's ideas we should steal. There's a reason that Deng Xiaoping is, when I spent a very small amount of time in China, I was there for like a couple of weeks just talking to general people. Everybody has a neutral to positive opinion of Deng Xiaoping, because he is recognized for what he did, which was make China rich. It's like, they said, it's like Mao made China stand up, like, to all the people who kept messing with China. That kind of stopped after Mao, and then Deng made China rich, and now the everything's, you can't judge Xi until it's all over, but I don't know, China's doing fine right now. The opinion is far less universally positive, by the way, of Xi, which I think is correct. Your current leader should never be, oh yes, our god, son, magic child, who we all love no matter what he does. That's not a good place to be in. So it seems that there is, you're not allowed to criticize the president. I heard a lot of criticizing the president when I was talking to people when I was there, but constructively. They're not just sitting around like, oh, what a dumb, stupid face he has, which is how Americans criticize their leaders. Yeah, I hate his hair.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I've heard about Orange Man Bad about it as many times as I can hear in my lifetime. Like, could you get a real opinion at this point, please? But I try to be more forgiving of people than I have been in the past about that, because I realize this is coming from deliberate ignorance. We have made people stupid on purpose to keep them from knowing any better or seeking out any other kind of alternative. So on that note,
say we're at an hour. You want to hear a sad song?
Yeah. On that note, we will give the floor to Jared. So thank you for joining us again for another hour of weirdness between the two of us. And we will be back next week at the same time. And thank you for joining us. And we will turn it over to Jared. So,
check. Have I entered the echo zone? Have I entered enough of the echo zone? What's going on, people? I wrote this song. It is called "I Can Always Say I Tried." Talking about unions. If you're out there doing the work, people, you can always say you tried, regardless of the outcome. Be it near, be it farther, every beat is getting stronger without you. Be it lose or a cheat, commemorate the flaws, repeat them at your peril. And ooh, it hurts too long. And ooh, the earth may never notice, and why I should. Does it hurt you like it hurts me? Open water, dusk to dawn. If it kills us, then so be it. I won't be hanging on and I can always say I tried. Be you daughters, be you sons, we'll give you all of what we are for good or worse. Be it godly referendum or a weekly uttered whisper, we will pick up our pieces, we will finish what we can, and ooh, it hurts to harm. And ooh, the earth may never notice, and why should she? Does it hurt you like it hurts me? Open water, dusk to dawn. If it kills us, then so be it. I won't be hanging on and on. Always say I tried. Tell the angels mind their business. They're not reaping what I've sown. Beat me down, destroy my army, break me up, then make me whole. Does it hurt you like it hurts me? Does it hurt you